Hello, everybody. My name's Nate. Love being together. It's a delicate weekend in the great state of Montana. Okay. I lived here about 3 months. This is 15 years ago when I decided that I was going to be Switzerland when it came to the Grizz cat situation, because it just seemed like a no-win for me whatsoever. So cat fans, don't gloat. Grizz fans, don't lose heart, okay? All right, we're all gonna be okay, I promise. Hey, we're in a series we're calling Teach Me, and the whole thought behind this series, which we do at least annually, is we're always wanting to emphasize this reality that we don't wanna be people who just have knowledge of the Bible. We don't want to be people who just carry the teachings of Jesus in our head, but we want to be practitioners, where we actually do it, where we obey, put into practice the things that Jesus teaches us. There's a beautiful historical theological concept which Martin Luther really championed, called the priesthood of all believers. And basically it meant this: when you read the ancient Old Testament, there are a few people who are assigned to be priests. That means they stand between humanity and God. They're in the middle. And the New Testament teaches us this, that everybody who is a follower of Jesus gets to be a priest. They get to act on behalf of God, speak as a vehicle of God's voice. And so that takes action. So Christianity is not just a philosophy, it is a way of life. And so in both Luke chapter 11 and Matthew chapter 6, Jesus' disciples are observing Jesus, the way he prays, and they ask this question: would you teach us how to pray? And so that's what we've been doing for the last several weeks. I thought this would be a 3 or 4 week series. We're not even close to being done, but we're asking the same question. So wherever you're at in your own spiritual journey, if prayer has not been a part of your life, or if you're a veteran and prayer is very essential in your life, we're asking that same question. We're personalizing it. Jesus, would you teach me how to pray? So when the disciples ask this question, this is what Jesus says. They ask, could you teach us how to pray? And Jesus says this, Matthew chapter 6, verse 9. This then is how you should pray. Our. It's not just mine, but it's that we're a part of a story, and we're a part of a movement of what God is doing on planet Earth. Father. There are so many words that could have been used here, your highness, your majesty. But Jesus says, when you approach the Father, use that term, our Father in heaven. When we think of this, we think of God being very distant, but in a first century Hebrew way of thinking, this word is actually plural. It means he's in the heavens, meaning he's not in the earth and not in the trees, but he is close, and he is in the air, in the atmosphere, and he is not distant, but he is close. Hallowed be your name. It's a tie to this Exodus chapter 3 moment where God reveals who he is to Moses. He says, here's what you can call me, Yahweh, meaning I will be who I will be. I am sacred, and I give you my name. Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done. We looked at that last week, that we take the throne off of our heads, or the crown off of our heads, and we put it on the head of Jesus, that we put the fruit back on the tree. The original sin was, I'll decide what's right and wrong in the Garden of Eden. And we make the choice to say, we surrender that. You decide what's right and wrong. Not my will, but your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. We get to be agents to interject this kingdom reality. Now, here's the line that we're going to focus on this week. Next slide, please. Give us today, our daily bread. And forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So this part of the prayer is the transition where Jesus asks us to make requests of God. Up until this point, it's establishing in our mind who God is and who we are, and taking a proper posture and position before God. And then there's going to be 3 things that are asked for. The first one we'll look at this week is daily bread. The second one is forgiveness. We ask for forgiveness. And the third one is deliverance from temptation or testing. So what does this look like? I love what N.T. Wright says about this in his book, The Lord's Prayer. Just a little quote. He says, "The danger in the part of the prayer that addresses daily bread is that we get there too soon." Does anybody else, when you stop to pray, you start with daily bread, right? Lord, here's what I need today. Here's the intense thing that I am going through. So we put this at the beginning and it becomes more of a shopping list. And Jesus says, wait, establish who God is. Establish that he's king in your life. Establish that you're part of a kingdom. And then, when you realize who God is and who you are in his presence, then ask for your daily bread. So when Jesus says, give us today our daily bread, here's what you and I do. I think about Monday morning. Or I think if you're probably not hungry because it's early, or you think about lunch, right? Like, Lord, what are you going to give me today? Here's what a first century Jew thought. Very different than our mentality. Because this goes all the way back to one of their origin stories. When you talked about daily bread to a Jewish person, they immediately went to this moment in time that they called their wilderness wanderings. So here's the setting. They've been slaves in Egypt for 400 years. That's a really long time, right? They've been told that they're subhuman. Their God has been fairly silent. This Yahweh has been fairly silent. They have been told that the gods that the Egyptians worship are the more powerful gods. So Isis and Osiris and Bet and these ongoing gods that are represented by the sun and the moon and the stars and the Nile River and have the shape of a crocodile or a jackal or a lion. And they've been crying out to this God for 400 years, and not much has happened. They're prospering, ironically. They become more and more populated, but Egypt weighs heavy on them. And then God comes to deliver through Moses. And they begin to leave Egypt, what they think will be a fairly quick trip to this land called the Promised Land, ends up being a 40-year-long trip. And in the wilderness, as they're wandering, they experience this provision of daily bread. And for 40 years, this bread is provided for them. So point number one is this, is as we go back, we need to look at the background. And the background is this thing called manna, which God provided for them for 40 years in the wilderness. And when Jesus talks about daily bread, they are thinking about this story. This story is in their minds. So I want to read through part of the account of manna because I don't think we can fully understand what Jesus says when he teaches us to pray for daily bread unless we understand that story, okay? So here they are. They're in the wilderness, and we'll read from the book of Exodus chapter 6, and we'll interject it because there's some really important things that Jesus was referring to. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is right near Las Vegas. It's it's a different desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. Now I want to pause and I want to show you some pictures because it'll help us to understand the importance of this daily bread. Here's a shot from space of this area. Egypt's over here, and you got this amazing thing called the Nile River, which led to so many natural resources and the thriving of this Egyptian community. And then here we have this area known as Sinai, and even from space, you can tell that's a lonely, dry place. They're going to take a journey kind of like this. They're going to wander around 40 years, and eventually they're going to make their way to, here's the Dead Sea, here's the Sea of Galilee. But it's a long journey. So what if we just got close to look at what does this region look like? There's lots of variety, but this would be a typical glimpse of the geography of this part of the world. Here's my question for you. If you were going to take a 40-year-long camping trip with 500 to 700,000 of your best friends, would you want it to be here? Right? There's just a few things that are missing. Shade, vegetation, water. Like there's a whole bunch of need. And why would God lead them on a 40-year journey through a place like this? How do you feed 500,000 people in a place like this? How do you survive in a place like this? I'm gonna show you one more picture. This is one of not many places that are inhabited in this desert of sin. This is Catherine the Monastery. And it was built many, many, many centuries ago by a group of monastics who said, we want to exist in the very area where the people wandered in the wilderness. And you'll notice it's a compound and they found water. And if you find water, you can survive. But aside from that, it's a barren desert in so many different regards. So this is where this account is taking place. Let's go back to Exodus. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, saying, it'd be better for us to have lived as slaves and to cease to exist in Egypt than to be in this place, in this desert, so isolated. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. They'd worked through all their provisions. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. I'm going to do something supernatural. The people are going to eat, how often? Each day, and gather enough for that day. Here's the plan. They don't know how long it's going to be, but God says, I am going to provide daily bread in the desert for a generation of people, each day. And this way, I will, really important word here, I will test them. What's being tested? I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. Again, we go back to the fundamental issue with humanity that we see emerge in Genesis chapter 3 in the Garden of Eden. Will you just trust me? Will you trust me to allow me to decide what is right and wrong? Will you trust me that I will provide for you every day? Here's the test. On the sixth day, so there's an exception to this. On the sixth day, which for them was Saturday, okay, the Sabbath, they are to prepare what they bring in. Excuse me, it would have been Friday, okay? So on Friday, the Sabbath is the seventh day. And that is to be twice as much as they gather the other days. The people of Israel called the bread, here's the word, manna. So what you and I don't know is it's a play on words. So Hebrew, when you ask the question, what is it? It's manna. And so when they walk up and they see this for the first time, they ask, what is that? And that becomes the name of this bread. They eat every day. What is it? Okay? Remember there was a candy bar called whatchamacallit? Literally for 40 days, 40 years, they eat what is it? Because the first time they come out, and it doesn't rain in the Sinai Peninsula, let alone rain bread. And so they come out and they're like, what is it? And that's manna, manna. Like, that's just what we name it. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. I want you to think about that for a moment. What would that have been like? I don't know about the coriander seed part, but the other part sounds like a graham cracker, right? This is their food that they will be eating for decades. We'll go on. We have a couple more verses to read. The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. 40 years. I don't know about you. People like to eat differently. Some of you like to experiment, right? You'll try like any unique ethnic food. I've been able to travel to strange parts of the world and enjoyed meals of horse, and dog, and weird stuff. And then some of us, it's Marinara Monday, right? Because every Monday I'm gonna have marinara. And it's Taco Tuesday, right? Can you imagine eating one food, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week for 40 years? Now, there's something amazing about this. Obviously, it had the nutritional benefit to keep them alive and to keep them thriving, and they continue to even multiply during these 40 years of wandering. They eat, 3 times a day, 7 days a week. So here's point number 2. It's a beautiful story, but you and I can imagine that there's some challenges involved. So point number 2 is this. There's a tendency toward ungratefulness. Do you remember God said, I want to test them. I want to see if they'll be okay with my daily provision or if they're going to have this desire for more. God, we don't trust you. We want a better experience. So this story continues some years later in the book of Numbers, chapter 11. This tendency towards ungratefulness. You can see it coming, right? Verse 1, the rabble with them. So Moses is writing this, we believe, and he calls them the rabble. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, the melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. What does that tell you? They want some variety of flavors, okay? Like at least we could put garlic in the manna or onions, something like that. They just want a new experience. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. Moses heard the people of every family wailing at the entrance to their tents. Tell the people, consecrate yourselves, set yourselves apart in preparation for tomorrow when you will eat meat. Now, this next part sounds like a parent feeding a 4-year-old who decides to be a picky eater. Look at what God says. The Lord heard you when you wailed. If all we had meat to eat, we were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it for just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils. And you loathe it, right? Because you have rejected the Lord. You failed that test of trusting me. I wasn't enough. Who is among you and have wailed before him saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? Here's the problem. God can provide daily bread, and we can still want more, right? And we live in a culture that's more used to more. There's expectations for more. We're in this unbelievably prosperous, blessed society. And I know that most of us don't feel rich, but in comparison to the rest of the world and human history, we have more than anybody could ever expect. We have freezers full of food. We have refrigerators. The ancient world, through the vast majority of human history till about 100 years ago, is food was something you looked for daily. You prepared it. You sought it out. There was never an assurance. There were no frozen pizzas or pot pies in your freezer, right? There wasn't a Costco or a Wingo. There was this needing, desiring to feed yourself, your family, whoever's dependent on you. And the challenge is we too can fail the test. Because I want more. What God gives is enough for me to survive, maybe even thrive. But I want more. Have you ever experienced this with a car? I remember the first car I got. It was a Datsun B210, 1982. It was the slowest car in my entire high school. I got beat in a drag race with a Yugo, okay? It was down to us, the two slowest cars. And when I first got that car, though, to be a 16-year-old with a car, I lived way out of town in the country, you just felt so independent. But somehow, by the time I got to like my junior year in college, I looked at that car and I loathed it. I want something better. It ran perfectly fine. That's the story of the human existence, right? Is God, thanks for the provision, but what else could you give me? What else could make me even happier? So here's my question. Can I live as a wilderness exile? Because when Jesus says, give us today our daily bread, he's going back to this story and he's reminding his disciples who are saying, teach us how to pray. He's reminding them that there is something inherent within humanity that wants more than daily provision. He says, can you have the mentality of the wilderness exile who lives for 40 years and is miraculously provided for by God every single day? So what would it mean to live as a wilderness exile? What would it mean to live as a wilderness exile in the most prosperous society that human history has ever seen before? Here's some thoughts on living as a wilderness exile. Number one, think daily. Think daily. Instead of thinking long-term all the time. Listen, there's a balance, right? Because you could go to the book of Proverbs, and there are all these proverbs that talk about how important it is to be a planner, how to think ahead, how to provide for the future. Absolutely. There's the story of Israel where in Egypt they have nothing. In the wilderness they have nothing but daily provision. But then there's going to come a time in history where David's their king and where Solomon's their king, and they're wealthy and they have influence. And there's always a challenge in this time when we have too much, that we no longer have to depend on God. We're no longer looking to him for our daily bread. It's the provision from the past. But he says, can you live in your walk with me? Can you pray that God, would you give me everything I need for today? I'm not going to put my trust in what I've done for the future, even if I have plenty. I'm going to acknowledge that every day you are behind everything in my life. You are the provider. I had an experience when I was a senior in high school. My best friend in high school was named Rex, and we both thought that we were born in the wrong century, and that we should have been, part of the Western expansion. So for high school graduation, we made this plan. We're going to go on a 7-day backpacking trip and take no food with us, right? Brilliant, 18-year-old logic. We're just going to live off the land. Well, I had the place in mind. It's a place I'd backpacked before, so we packed in many, many miles. And what I didn't anticipate is I'd always caught a lot of fish in this area, is that all the streams were in runoff. And so like catching fish was a near impossibility. But we both took our little 22s. We thought that's no problem. We'll live off the wild game. Day 1 came, we didn't shoot anything. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, Rex shot a marmot. And we're so hungry, right? 18-year-olds who haven't eaten for 3 days, but you're refusing to leave. And so immediately when he starts like skinning and cleaning this marmot, we're both like, oh, that smells horrible, right? And we're like, but man, I'm sure when you cook it, it's gonna be fine. So we've got a fire and we're cooking the marmot. And the more you cook it, the worse it smells. But we're so hungry. And so we're sitting around the fire at night. Like, can you imagine just chewing on a marmot leg? And every bite is just, it's the greasiest, it just tastes like a weasel, right? Just like, So we get through that, and then the next day, there's nothing. And then the 5th day, like we get a little tiny rabbit, and we share it. And we've got 3 more days to go. We pack up our bags and get out and go right to McDonald's. Because it's like we couldn't do it. I hadn't been at a place in my life where I couldn't go to the fridge. and open the door. Mom, we need more cereal, right? That's how I had grown up. But for the first time in my life, I'm looking for food every single day. And God says, could you have this mentality? Jesus says, when you pray, God, today, I don't even know what's coming, but there will be moments of crisis. Yeah, I'll have physical needs, and I'm going to trust that you provide them every day, but I'm also going to have other types of needs. I'm going to have moments where I need to make a decision. And would you give me daily wisdom? I'm going to have moments where I have conflict with other people. And God, here's what I'm praying. Today, would you give me the grace to forgive people who offend me? Today, I'm going to have some opportunity, and I'll either be fearful or I'll be courageous. Would you today give me courage for whatever it is I face? It's daily provision. Here's the second thing about being a wilderness exile. Not only is it about daily provision, but notice Jesus uses the word us. Give us our daily bread. I love this because I become very concerned with my daily bread, but Jesus again uses the plural. And so part of learning to pray like this is I'm not only aware of my personal needs, but it's us. Remember, I'm part of this new kingdom, this new family. And so when I pray for daily bread, it's not just my daily bread. I'm praying for people who are suffering. God, would you give them the patience? Would you give them the healing that's needed? I can pray for people around the globe. Lord, give us our daily bread. It's not just a story about me. It's a story about a much bigger picture that exists. And then the third thought about being a wilderness exile is this idea of thankfulness or gratefulness. And it just happens to be the week of Thanksgiving, of course, right? And here's the challenge. It's the dynamic that operates in all of our lives is we have enough, but we want more. And we're the people that wail at the tent and just want different experiences. We want something more, and we start looking backwards and what could have been. And Jesus says, pass the test. Can you pass the test? Because his ancestors couldn't pass the test. But could I be someone who is content with the provision of the Lord? Here's the challenge. I imagine the first day they wake up. So by the way, manna came overnight, and they said it fell like dew. And this manna eventually evaporated in the heat of the day. So the first day they come out, and they're hungry, right? And they see all the manna, and like, what is it? Manna. They're like, oh, you can eat it. And when you're hungry, I bet the whole community was like, God, thank you. I don't know how you did this. How in the world does bread fall from the sky and gather adequately so that we can bring it into ourselves and nourish ourselves? What, 2, 3, 4 weeks of gratefulness? And then you open your tent one day and the same miracle happened. But you're like, you know, like, seriously, again? And your faithfulness evaporates. It happens for all of us. Here's what I want. Here's what I think Jesus is asking us is, no matter what God provides, can I remain grateful? Can I pass the test? Instead of wishing for another alternative, another history, could we go back to Egypt? Can I say, God, I've had a lot of manna, but thanks one more time. One more time for this white bread that looks like coriander seed and tastes like crackers and honey. And it nourishes my body. I choose to be grateful. You know, even part of the tradition of saying grace, I bet a lot of us do that. You were raised with that? Oftentimes what it turns into is, Lord, would you bless this food? That's what we've morphed it into. And I think that's appropriate, you know, if you're at like the truck stop and you're getting a hot dog or gas station sushi, you know, you might even want to lay hands on it and Lord, This hot dog's been rolling in that thing for I don't know how, but God, would you bless this sushi? I pray it was made in the last week. And would you eliminate all toxins? There are times when you do that. But originally, here's what grace was meant to be, is you said a blessing, but it wasn't blessing the food, it was blessing the Lord. Is you just pause. I love to work that in. It can become a little bit empty, right? Is you just like say grace. My sweet mom comes from just the greatest family, but I will always remember they had a traditional prayer they prayed before every meal. And her brothers would just speed up this prayer and see who could do it the fastest. And it was, bless, O Lord, this food for our use and keep us ever mindful in needs of others. Amen. And I'd be like, I didn't even get my eyes all the way closed. And we're like, amen. And it's just, like, go for it. I think when we say a prayer before a meal, part of what I can do, I can work into my prayer time. Lord, thank you. Thank you for what I'm about to eat. I acknowledge it's from you. And thank you for what you've done in the last 4 hours. And thank you what you're going to do in the next few hours. I just thank you. Living as a wilderness exile, thankfulness, but also dependence. Here's part of what God wanted them to learn, is that they had been dependent on Egypt to feed them. And now they get to be dependent on God. And I think more than anything else, why would God take you to a desert? It's because it's in the desert when I have no resources. There's no water. There's no food. There's a beauty in having a life of dependence. It's what drives us to need God. Isn't it true that in most of our lives, the better things are, the less we think of God? And the moment the crisis happens, the moment the disappointment happens, we're like, God, help me, help me, help me. There's something about being a disciple of Jesus where I want to learn to live in daily dependence. It's my daily bread. The last thing about being a wilderness exile is this, it's personal engagement. Okay, personal engagement. So this miracle happened, we didn't read part of it, where every human was allowed an allotment of manna. It was called an omer, which was like the size of a significant jar. And when you got up every morning, every person had to gather their own omer of what is it? And all children, everybody, you couldn't like anybody who's industrious, you filled like 40 omers and you sold it to people who weren't willing to gather. Couldn't do that. Every human being. So can you imagine this? Every day you wake up and you're like, hey family, come on. It's time for breakfast, lunch, and dinner in one jar. Let's go. And so they'd go out and you have the little kids filling their omer with manna. And you have the elderly. And you had dads and moms and cousins. And everybody has to fill it for themselves. And some people were lazy. And God said, I want you to do this every day, except for on Saturday. And some people said, I don't want to get out here tomorrow. I want to sleep in. And so they filled up 2 jars. And overnight, the manna became rancid and developed maggots, right? Because God wanted this to be daily provision and daily engagement. And everybody had to say every day, God, thank you. This is going to get me through the day. So there's personal engagement. And I think there's something to personally engaging with God daily. I can't live off the spiritual vitality of a friend or a mentor or a parent or a spouse. I have to engage with Jesus myself. And this brings us to the very final thing that will close us. When Jesus says, give us today our daily bread, he's hearkening back to the ancient story of manna. But Jesus also uses the concept of daily bread to describe who he is. So point number 4 is this: Jesus, the bread of life. Jesus, the bread of life. In John chapter 6, we'll start at verse 32. Jesus is speaking to a big crowd of people who he has just provided a miracle of food for. He's fed at least 5,000 people with just 5 loaves of barley and 2 little fish. And they're like excited, free meals, right? And here's what Jesus said to them: very truly I tell you, It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven. He's talking about the Exodus story, right? And Moses wasn't your provider, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. So manna fell down from heaven. Moses was the leader, but he's not responsible. God's the provider. And he says, and now there's a true bread from heaven that comes from the Father. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven. And what does it do? It gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. Like, that sounds delicious. Like, it provides vitality. And Jesus declared, I am the bread of life, provided by my Father, that comes down from heaven. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. And whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So Jesus takes this whole metaphor, the story of the wilderness and being in exile, and he says there are needs that a human being has that goes far beyond thirst and hunger. It's not just about nutrition. He said God has now sent a new manna, a new supernatural provision. Jesus says, it's me. And I've come to satiate the hunger that is deep within humanity for a Savior, for someone who would love them. And I can take care of spiritual hunger and thirst if you partake of me. Interestingly, if you continue to read in John chapter 6, it's the only time that I'm aware of where many disciples refused to follow Jesus because they found his teaching offensive. He goes on to say this, unless you eat of me, you'll always be hungry. He actually uses the phrase, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. Jesus says, I'm the bread from heaven, like the ancient manna, and I have come to deal with, to satiate the cravings of the soul, the loneliness and distance from your Creator. I have come to eliminate shame and pain and heartache and loneliness from God. Partake of me. Partake of me. Jesus is the bread of heaven. So here would be my challenge for each and every one of us. I can't live off of yesterday's provision. Can I pass the test? That God's daily provision of Jesus is enough. Jesus is enough. And it's not a historical relationship I have with him, but it's every day. Do I gather what Jesus provides? The peace, the stability, the hope, the forgiveness, the trust, the provision that's physical. I want to learn to trust. Would you stand to your feet? We're going to, as we have in past weeks, say this prayer together. And when we come to the section on daily bread, would you learn how to pray this week? By going to him and letting him feed the depth of your soul daily. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. If you need prayer, there's people up front you can trust. If you need a Bible, they're free at the Welcome Center. If you're a guest, we have a gift. As you go, be the hands and feet and mouthpiece of Jesus. Trust him for your daily bread. God bless you. You're loved.